7. Do you have cows? When Father bade us move to the lands of refuge, he told us that the Gentiles and apostates wanted to kill us, and that soon there would be a great martyrdom in the city of Short Creek. The people's only chance for survival and redemption would be to move to the lands of refuge. The day after Mother's funeral, Father sent me with Rich back to the land of refuge in South Dakota, known as Audiobook, where he had been living with two of his other ladies. Audiobook was located in a secluded area of the Black Hills just south of Pringle in the southwest corner of the state, not far from Mount Rushmore. With only 3 FLDS families living there, I wondered where Father would have me give birth. No one there had any midwifery experience, and this baby would be coming along in a few weeks. Since only the worthiest people could live on the lands of refuge, Father had recorded hours of special trainings for the people there to listen to and live by. Every new person who came to live on the lands had to complete all of these trainings before they did anything else. If we listened from morning till night, it took about 2 weeks to get through them all. If anyone so much as fell asleep while listening, that person could be sent away. There were many new rules to learn. Clothing. All clothing had to be made by our own hands. None could be purchased from Gentiles. Dresses had to have shirt collars. Dresses had to be made of light pastel colors, because God delights in pastels. No more braids hanging down our backs. God now wanted us to wear our hair up on our heads. A woman's hair was considered sacred, and was to be used for sacred ordinances with her husband in the temple, so its length could not be revealed. Women and children had to kneel down to pray in a prayer circle every hour on the hour, from 5 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. To get up late or miss hourly prayer was a grievous sin before God. Missing too often would result in being sent away from the lands of refuge, and repentance and rebaptism would be required to return. Food. We could eat only food we made ourselves. Purchasing processed food was forbidden. Sugar was forbidden. Wheat flour was forbidden. Only wheat flour, and eventually only wheat flour grown by our own hands, was allowed. Milk had to be raw. Gentile homogenized milk was forbidden. Only meat from cows and chickens raised on the lands was allowed. There was a positive in all of these new requirements. The people learned many useful skills. We lived off the land and the work of our own hands, and I remain grateful to this day for the knowledge and ability to do that. It taught us not only self-sufficiency but also a healthy lifestyle and respect for the land. And everybody worked for the greater good of the community. The storehouse was the church store, which ran as a cooperative for the benefit of everyone. Ember's labors for the church not only stocked the shelves, but earned us the privilege of getting what we needed. The ladies all learned how to sew every kind of clothing for the storehouse: jeans, dresses, underwear, briefs, leggings, and bras. We learned how to process milk into cheese, yogurt, sour cream, and butter. We canned all types of fruit and vegetables. The men earned their privileges through their construction labors, as they were in charge of putting up the buildings on the lands of refuge. All members were required to donate anything that they did not need to the storehouse for others to use. The church also purchased food and other personal items that we were unable to make ourselves. No money changed hands as a member of the United Order. We were allowed to get anything we needed, with the caveat that we must never take anything extra. The early settlers of the lands of refuge were instructed to build homes quickly for the people who would be coming after us, and were brought in from Short Creek without their families as a laborers of Zion to complete the construction. There were strict deadlines for each building, and if the men did not meet them, the punishment was severe. Some men lost their families forever as a result of missing these dates. The men were given just 14 days to build one house, with 14 bedrooms and 12 bathrooms and enormous living areas. It took 60 men working 22 hours a day to meet the deadline and keep their families and salvation. The women were forbidden to help with the construction work. Our job was to take care of the gardens and the cooking and cleaning. We were forbidden to spend time with or even near the laborers. Too, they slept in trailers or in their trucks. Some were allowed to stay in a room in one of the houses where no women lived. A few older ladies on the land were in charge of preparing meals for the crew. I was in the Black Hills only 2 weeks when Father told Rich to take me back to Texas to stay with Father's family until my baby was born. I can only assume he had the same thought as I did about there being no midwife on the lands in South Dakota. It was another very long ride for a very pregnant woman, but I was so glad to see my little sisters again. Amber wrapped her little arms around my legs and yelled with great excitement, "Hi, Rachel." "Hi, I love you," I said quietly in her ear, my heart aching for this motherless girl. When I went inside, it hit me all over again that Mother was gone, and that I would never find refuge or solace in her room again. I was overwhelmed with a sense of loneliness. Mother Annette invited me to stay in her room with her, but she had 11 children, many of whom were still young, making her room a hot spot of wild children coming and going at all hours. It was already hard to get any rest because I was so uncomfortable when I lay down, and the added constant noise made it nearly impossible to nap or sleep through the night. One morning, I walked into the dining room and found Father flirting with several young girls I recognized from my class when I had taught 3rd grade. They couldn't have been more than 13 or 14 years old now. "What are those girls doing here?" I asked Angela. She laughed. "They're married to Father." "No way." I watched as Father hugged and kissed them, essentially showing off his new little brides to the family. "I know what you're going through," I thought. "He tricks you into thinking it is God's will." When I couldn't stand to watch this scene any longer, I went down the hall to Angela's room. She came to join me a few minutes later. "What's wrong?" Angela said. "I'm a little surprised Father married such young girls." I didn't dare say too much. Talking against the prophet was unforgivable, so our conversation pretty much stopped right there. Over the next weeks, Father spent most of his time in his room as waves of mothers went in and out in groups. I tried to convince myself that whatever was happening in that room was innocent, that he was a better man now that he was the prophet. A few days later, Father called the people together for a general meeting. He chastised some of the men for not completing a home they were building on time. As a result, he said he would now have to atone for the people so that God might forgive them. "I will pray for you," Father said, and we all bowed our heads. As he was praying, he began to slur, and the words he spoke sounded like nonsense. I opened my eyes and saw he was shaking violently, and then he slowly fell to the ground, unconscious. What an excellent actor, I thought. But the people in the room bought the act. Women were crying, and the men were speechless. I had an urge to laugh, but I knew if I did I would surely be damned. Father's wife Naomi stood up. "Leave. Everyone leave." The people filed out of the meeting house as quickly as possible. "How could we bring this upon our prophet? We have truly sinned," I heard someone say. The women were still crying. I wondered if Father had really gone weird in the head. Trying to convince himself that he was the prophet of the people went against all the rules of the church, and he knew he was a sinner. Maybe the contradiction was too much for his mind to handle. Weeks later, Father called a special meeting. He said that God wanted some of his close wives to testify that his odd behavior during the special prayer had been his atoning for us, and that he had suffered greatly on our behalf. The wives testified that they had felt the power of God around him, and had seen visions of angels surrounding him, and administering to him as the Spirit of God rushed over him. Why does he have to explain it to us if it was really God? I thought, but most everyone else seemed to accept all of this as coming from God. Little sister Josie stopped me in the dining room. "Rachel, do you have cows at the land of refuge you live at?" Father was sitting at the end of the table. I had promised to keep everything about Art 23 secret and sacred. But cows? I said a yes quickly, and walked out of the room. The next day Father was on the move again, but he called me from the road. "The Lord showed me that you have been talking about the land where you live to your sisters and my family at R17. The Lord calls upon you to repent. Answer me honestly. What have you told about the land of refuge R23? I told him about Josie asking about cows, which Father obviously knew about because he'd been in the room, and then he gave me a long, strong correction about keeping everything secret and sacred. Once he was done with me, Father asked to be put on the main speaker in the living room and to summon the family together, and then he gave the whole family a correction. He said if they did not keep everything secret and sacred, he would not be able to return to the land for a long time, and they would all be destroyed by God. Afterward, I borrowed a cell phone and called Rich. I had forgot about all the drama in Father's family. I don't like being here. Rachel, be grateful. It's an honor to be at your father's house. Be patient until I am allowed to come down to be with you. Father returned a week later during a spate of major thunderstorms, and because of the terrible weather, a building deadline was not met. Father called a meeting to correct the people. He said if he hadn't come back when he did and intervened with the Lord through his atoning, we would all have been destroyed by the storms. Father was continually atoning for us now. Every bad thing we survived was because he once again atoned for us. His atonement usually happened in his room, so that his wives could give him a heavenly comfort to keep him alive. Father said the deadline was met, because some of the men were sinners, citing in particular presiding elder Ernest Jessup, and his counselor, Alan Steed. And he sent the 2 men away forever. He said he would give their families to other men who were more worthy. His correction scared the remaining men who were laboring for Zion. They worked even harder to meet the deadlines for fear of losing their families. The land of refuge grew quickly as houses and gardens were built, the people working diligently to please their God and prophet. Women and children were commanded to dig up all the cactus on the 1,800-acre property, because God did not like cactus on the land, Father said. Since I was hugely pregnant, I didn't participate, but I watched as the women worked, pulling up cactus after cactus and throwing them onto mountains of prickly green corpses, only to find more growing in their place a few days later. Eventually, they managed to remove all of the cactus plants from the property. Father told the men that God had commanded that they begin construction on a large temple, and he set more impossible deadlines. As the men failed to meet them, more of them were sent away. Water broke 3 weeks early, on September 5, 2004. Grandmother Sharon was my midwife again. She was worried I would get an infection, so she put me on an old antibiotic that had been donated to her. The contractions began at 7:30 that evening. The midwife decided that I would give birth in the bedroom I had been staying in the bed I had been sleeping in, which I was too happy about. Labor advanced quickly this time, and within 2 hours I was dilated to 7 centimeters. But when I hadn't advanced any further 20 minutes later, the midwife gave me 9 of pitocin, injecting the full dose into my left thigh. Almost instantly, I fell to the floor as the medicine induced one long, continuous contraction. It felt like I was having every contraction every pregnant woman had ever had all at once. I couldn't hear or see for the pain, and I began to scream and scream. Rachel, stop acting like that, Rich said, pulling me up off the floor and lifting me onto the bed. He had come back from South Dakota a week earlier. I told myself the only way to make the agony stop was to push the baby out, and I did. Relief was instantaneous when I saw my new baby daughter. The next day the midwife, the assistant midwife, and some of Father's wives came to see me. They asked why I had lost control during the delivery. One of them said, "Women in the priesthood do not lose control and scream like that." I felt ashamed. I didn't know until years later that that much pitocin all at once was the reason I wasn't able to handle the pain, and that it could have ruptured my uterus or killed my baby.